بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أود أن أرحب بكم في الجلسة الخامسة والتي سوف تتطرق على موضوع مجال التصميم وتطوير البرامج الإلكترونية. لا شك أننا نعيش في عالم يتحرك بسرعة غير مسبوقة، أثرت تأثيرا واضحا في كل نواحي حياتنا، ولا شك أن التعلم من أبرز ذلك لأنه محور رئيسي في بناء الإنسان. فيسرني أن أقدم في هذه الجلسة نخبة من الباحثين ليتحدثوا عن تجاربهم المختلفة، فأرجو أن تكون فيها الفائدة والمتعة. وأول متحدثين الدكتورة نوريزان رزالي، وتعتبر من الاستراتيجيين في مجال تحويل التعليم مع التركيز على دور التكنولوجيا أو تكنولوجيا المعلومات والاتصالات، وقد حصلت على كل مؤهلاتها من جامعة بنسلفانيا، ونالت شهادة الدكتوراه من أيضا بنسلفانيا، وساهمت في تطوير وتحويل التعليم لأكثر من 15 عام في المؤسسة التنمية للوسائط المتعددة في ماليزيا. ويسعدنا أن نرحب بها ضيفة علينا في هذه الجلسة. دكتور رزالي، floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for those kind words. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. At the onset, allow me to congratulate the organizers for having this event, and also my appreciation for the privilege and honor of sharing the Malaysian experience, and in particular our experience in e-content development and our way forward. So today my presentation is entitled Next Gen E-Content, and I hope to discuss that in this presentation through these various items on the agenda. So it looks rather heavy, but I will try to share this with you the best I can. So before I go on with the presentation, I would like to perhaps introduce the organization that I represent, which is the Multimedia Development Corporation, or known as MDEC. It was established in 1996 during the era of Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, when he introduced the Multimedia Super Corridor Malaysia, or now known as MSC Malaysia. So for the last decade, I have been heading the Smart School Department, ensuring the development of education via technology. So today, I'm delighted to share with you one of the components of the Smart School flagship, or huge ICT project for education that I have been very privileged to lead over the last decade. So this is the sort of premise that my presentation is making. Essentially, I am arguing that we have not fully optimized the benefits of ICT for education. So in this context, I'm arguing that there's a lot more that we can do through ICT for the purpose of e-content development. Yeah? So we are discussing this on the basis of rather lengthy R&D work, research and development work that we have done over the past few years, starting from 2006 and up until this year. The R&D work involves studies, engagement with stakeholders, agencies, users, and also companies, content development companies, education content companies, as well as creative content companies. So one of the highlights of the research and development work is the study that we conducted in 2006 involving 5,000 users of e-content that our Ministry of Education developed, involving 400 schools, 30 subject matter experts, and over 100 companies. So this was done in 2006, but we continued on work in engaging these stakeholders to derive at the strategies and steps on how do we transform our e-content development with the rationale of optimizing ICT for e-content, bringing value to it, and not using ICT for the purpose of using ICT. So based on our R&D, we have come up with two strategies. One is the next-gen e-content, a short version for next-generation e-content, which is essentially a prototype for something that our stakeholders can refer to and develop a further project on it. And also the process standards for the development of next-gen e-content, because it is important to put in place standards that meet our requirements and so that it is sustainable. So because one of the greatest issues that we discovered is the lack of standards that meet our requirements. So when we talk about e-content in the context of my presentation, we are referring to the commercially developed e-content, because in these days and age, when we talk about e-content, it could either mean content from the internet or user-generated content or even commercially developed content. But here in this context, I'm referring to the commercially developed content because our Ministry of Education spends a lot of money in engaging companies to develop e-content. So that's the commercial perspective. And with a clear outcome of instilling the 21st century skills to our students. There are 7 million students in public schools in Malaysia, 10,000 schools, and about 400,000 teachers. So those are my clients. Okay. So a little bit of background, further observations that I'd like to share with you in terms of the findings of our R&D that have formed the basis for our transformation in e-content. There are many findings, but I think I would highlight them in three broad areas. The first observation is the issue with usage. Although the Malaysian government has spent millions and perhaps encroaching into billions of ringgit in developing content, in 2006, when we did the courseware evaluation or evaluation of our Ministry of Education content, e-content, it was found that only 15% out of the 5,000 users that we studied used the e-content for various reasons. Some of the reasons given were they were not aware of the availability of the content, that they could not manipulate the content or control the content or customize the content, and that or they did not have the skills to use the content. So these are the three major problems related to the low usage of content that we observed. And also the economic and pedagogical values in terms of the e-content that was developed. That it cost a lot of money, but relatively low pedagogical values because of the problem that I mentioned just now, that the teachers could not really design their own lessons because the e-content was essentially lessons in themselves. So there was little room for the teachers to actually use the content for developing their lessons because the e-content was already lessons in themselves. So very little pedagogical values that was brought to the teachers. And really also another big issue was the outcomes. Really, what were the outcomes that were targeted for this e-content? So, there were comments or statements issued, like, for example, preparing the students for exams, or mirroring the curriculum. Those weren't really outcomes, but these were the objectives that were referred to at the onset of the e-content development. So really, there weren't really clear outcomes. So given the current scenario, there's now industry growth in Malaysia, education and creative content industry in Malaysia since the inception of the MSc Malaysia through MDAC. The industry has grown, and it is perceived to not being leveraged enough to support the Ministry of Education in transforming the e-content. So there is greater demand and pressure on the Ministry of Education to leverage this talent that's available in the content industry in Malaysia, which is really a big business. And there is really a concern over whether there is enough innovative value with technology advancement and its convergence with the pedagogical value. It's seen that old pedagogy method was used through new technology. So that's really a call for the Ministry of Education to innovate via the technology and introduce new pedagogical approaches. And with our new Prime Minister, there's now really a very strong drive towards outcome. And then, we have this performance first, or is it performance and people first policy, and that outcome must be clear, and that therefore in relation to e-content, there has to be a clear outcome that needs to be put in place. And as I have indicated in my first slide, is the instilling the 21st century skills among students. And there's also a greater pressure exerted to look at what lessons learned in the past in terms of e-content. So let's look at those lessons and how we can conduct the transformation by referring to those lessons learned. And I will share with you very quickly the various phases of e-content in deriving those various lessons. If we recall amongst educators, when TV and films were first introduced, there was this euphoric reaction amongst technologists who introduced TV and films that the role of teachers would diminish because TV and films would take over. Through literature about this technology, you would find that very common reaction that the role of teacher would gradually diminish. But obviously that didn't happen. Now, essentially because the technology from television and films lacked the ability to interact with the learner and to meet learners' needs. So therefore, even technology at that point could not provide that interactivity. So this was the lesson learned, that with technology, there's greater expectation amongst users that they need to interact. So that was the issue with the first phase of e-content. And then perhaps in the late 70s and 80s, the first generation e-content was introduced with CD-ROMs being the device used. But e-content at that stage resembled a textbook, and it was pretty much digitization of the curriculum. So not really much technology intervention in terms of delivery of the content, essentially, and also a lot of conventional strategy. Memorization, drill, and practice were the common features in this phase of e-content. And then, quite recently, there's the rise of the internet, the 80s and 90s. So there were a lot of learning portals that emerged. However, the conventional approach still dominated a lot of the e-content. As far as the Ministry of Education in Malaysia content, it still resembled courseware. It's very much ready-made lessons for teachers. So it didn't quite solve the problem that we had earlier, that it's old pedagogy with new technology. So that still remains the problem. So obviously we have not really learned from